This week, first up, it's the enterprise security news, and we're going to discuss how IaaS cloud vulnerabilities are expected to increase 50%, according to a report examining security process maturity in 400 organizations. Snow Software unveils some new features to combat security and compliance threats, and it's a couple, maybe one or two funding and acquisition updates from Aviatrix and enSilo. In the second segment, Carter Minucci, he's the cybersecurity manager at the Florida Municipal Power Agency, talk about the IT-OT convergence, always a fun topic to discuss. Finally, in the final segment, we've got a topic, a vulnerability management evaluation guide. This is something I'd like to do more of on various topics. The first one is an area that Matt and I are pretty intimately familiar with in vulnerability management. So stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. Networks are becoming increasingly complex and fragmented, and digital transformation and DevOps are driving an explosion in network connectivity changes. With each new network connection, cyber attackers may gain another opening to breach or traverse the network. At Tufin, they've pioneered a policy-based approach to network security management using automation and analytics. As a result, you can make network changes in minutes instead of days, reliably and securely. To learn more about Tufin, the security policy company, go to securityweekly.com/Tufin and sign up for a free evaluation. By the end of 2020, 99% of exploited vulnerabilities will be publicly disclosed and known to IT system admins. The consequences of that fact means the burglar will already be in your house because you left the front door wide open by failing to patch known vulnerabilities. How can you keep the threat actors out? Through cloud-based automation, Automox enables you to slam the door on unpatched OS and third-party vulnerabilities across your entire Windows, Mac, and Linux infrastructure. Take advantage of a free trial with Automox to not only see the vulnerability status of your infrastructure, but do something about it within minutes. Start automating the fundamentals of cyber hygiene at securityweekly.com/Automox. That's securityweekly.com/Automox. Most cloud threats are your responsibility, not your cloud service providers, and prevention-based security isn't enough on its own. That's why Gartner predicts that 60% of enterprise security budgets will go towards detection and response in 2020. ExtraHop RevealX Cloud delivers cloud-native network detection and response for the hybrid enterprise, the only SaaS-based NDR solution for AWS. Request your 30-day free trial of RevealX Cloud at extrahop.com/trial. That's extrahop.com/trial. Welcome, everyone, to episode number 159 of Enterprise Security Weekly for October 30th, 2019. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian, broadcasting from G-Unit Studios that's typically on fire. Matt Alderman is in snowy Colorado.
It is Wednesday, and the kids have been off 2 days already this week.
Yes.
But I think we're done. I think we're done.
Hopefully we're done with, like, fires and stuff. So there was three incidents. The last one you don't know about yet, Matt. So the first one, the AC unit in our server room had some type of malfunction, or its exhaust port was clogged. Thermal exhaust port. It really was a thermal exhaust port because the heat came back into the server room, spiking the temperature to 120 degrees. I walked in there, I felt like I was in Las Vegas. So we're getting that issue taken care of. Then one of our other computers just decided to spontaneously combust, and there was sparks showering everywhere and loud popping noises, and employees like jumping behind the couch to get away from it, which was interesting. So that systems being RMA'd. Then this morning, I was working on the new laptop that came in, and like I was having trouble turning it on, and all of a sudden, like a little bit of smoke billowed up from the laptop. So that one's being sent back as well. And I'm done with those laptops. I'm not doing another laptop, Matt. I'm going in a different direction.
We don't have luck with equipment in the last
apparently
week.
Not. Apparently not. So things on fire can be bad when we're talking about computers. So we're literally on fire lately. here at Security Weekly, literally and figuratively, because I'm excited about this show and what we're going to talk about. First, we've got exciting news about our webcast program. Of course, we are partnering with ISC Squared, which means if you attend any of our webcasts, whether they are the ones coming up with Core Security and Great Horn, so one on email security with Great Horn and one on penetration testing with Core Security. Also, ServiceNow is in the mix. So some of the ones we've got upcoming are going to be a lot of fun as always. Or you can watch them in our on-demand archive as well. 1 CPE credit per webcast. Go to securityweekly.com, even click the webcast drop-down menu and register for the upcoming ones, or check out the on-demand library. It's all on that menu on the main website. So now we've got some enterprise security news to talk about, Matt. And of course, I don't have the articles up on the right screen.
Of course not.
But the first one had to do with something about a survey. Oh, about IaaS vulnerabilities, infrastructure as a cloud vulnerabilities.
Yeah, this is an interesting article. The headline is IaaS cloud vulnerabilities expected to increase 50% over 2018 figures. Okay, so you dig into this thing and you're like, look at the list that's on here: IBM, Nextcloud, OpenStack, Red Hat, Kubernetes.
You're like, hold on, where's Google? And
Amazon, where's Amazon?
Or maybe any of the big three,
right,
that you would go to support your infra. I mean, AWS being the most obviously tried and true, right?
Right. So there's nothing here around Amazon's Amazon Linux or EC2.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing here for Google. There's nothing here for Microsoft, which we traditionally think of as cloud infrastructure as a service providers. Now, IBM does have an IBM cloud.
They do.
And so IBM and Oracle can kind of debate who's in the fourth position, but who cares? The big three are the only ones that matter. So, okay, IBM on the list makes sense. The rest of these are supporting technologies to cloud infrastructure. Things like Red Hat, OpenShift,
correct.
Things like Kubernetes, which are components of moving into the cloud and stuff. But I wouldn't consider them cloud IaaS.
I was thinking this morning, and which is always dangerous, but that these things become infrastructure, I think, as we move forward, right? I think it becomes more about you've got your applications, you've got your data, and you control who accesses it. All these things, right? We start with the network on up to the operating system, on up to some of these platforms. I think a lot of the expertise, we look at over time, the expertise that we've had to obtain in security and IT, we really had to know a lot of the guts in like physically installing some of these things and managing and maintaining them. I think a lot of that goes away, and it's more about managing your data and applications and users. So it's the same. You're still managing security. You're still managing systems. It's just very different. I think a lot of the work that we're doing with containers today will largely be extracted, right? You're not going to really have to, a developer may not have to be as hands-on with Docker, for example. That'll just be like, yes, the container's there. I want like these things, and they'll move on with life. I was thinking that in the context of our production systems. If I look at putting some of our stuff inside of containers, I really want to abstract that management of those so that the user can go create environments and stuff, right? I want to abstract Docker. I want to extract the Docker file. I want to extract the Kubernetes config away from the user and just give them an interface to go, yeah, I want to just go build like these three systems and go deploy them, right? So I think that further, as we move on with time, that's further going to be abstracted and just be part of infrastructure as a service, as we're talking about here.
Yeah, and some of these are going to roll into platform as a service. They already are.
Yeah, they already are.
Is a Kubernetes service.
Fargate, right? And
all
Google
these
and Microsoft have where they've actually already done that, right, on a more IT level, not application specific, but you can go deploy infrastructure at those various levels in the stack very easily.
Yeah, couple things. Red Hat and Kubernetes 6% increase. That's pretty low considering the amount of usage of those products in the enterprise. Kubernetes is now the de facto orchestrator for all the organizations. Docker's not on this list, which is interesting as well. Again, when you think about containerization and where we're going, Red Hat OpenShift's on here, but Docker's not on here. So I thought that was a little interesting too in these results. But it depends on how you define infrastructure as a service cloud vulnerabilities. I think is part of the challenge a little bit with the survey.
Agreed. But I am getting back to actual infrastructure as a service vulnerabilities. We talked about that one with Edgewise, right? That was a not widely publicized bug at all. Or I don't know if you call it a bug necessarily. It was actually built into their infrastructure. A very kind of actually like Microsoft Active Directory kind of style vulnerability that exposed access to something that shouldn't be there. And I think, though, obviously those are going to continue to be true when you put your infrastructure on, basing on someone else's infrastructure. That doesn't mean someone else's infrastructure doesn't have vulnerabilities that could impact you.
True.
Respond software adds web filtering, investigation, and discovery capabilities to its Respond Analyst solution. I feel like we've covered Respond, may have covered this. This was a new one. We've covered a Respond software not that long ago, I feel like.
Yeah, I think we did. I'm pretty sure we did a sponsored interview with them at Black Hat, actually, earlier this year. One of the first times we've had a chance to work with them. I know a couple of the folks that are part of Respond Software. One of them's based here in Colorado. I mean, what they're doing, it makes sense, right? The one interesting, innovators in robotic decision automation. I thought that was a really interesting term.
Sure.
Hadn't seen that before, because you don't think of SOAR from a robotics perspective. So I thought it was a little interesting how they kind of positioned themselves with this concept of robotic decision automation. But what they're doing makes sense. I thought that was the interesting part of the article. I hadn't seen that term used before.
It's very interesting. Yeah, and they're talking about this in the context of web filtering. I think as we look at some of the more advanced technologies in security, filtering web traffic in general is just harder and harder. And then if you look at very targeted attacks, right? Call it attacks against the business, call it APT, call it whatever you want, right? But a very well-crafted attack is going to stand up infrastructure that is likely going to evade any kind of filtering you put in place, right? Either I'm compromising infrastructure that's already whitelisted in whatever kind of web filtering you're doing. I'm using URLs and protocols that aren't going to trigger any alarms, right? And that's where I think attackers have basically progressed to because of the, well, and it's interesting, because of the filters that are available today, they've largely just moved away from that to avoid those things. I mean, I think previously, you look back 10 years, web filtering was important, right? I think it's less and less important to do that kind of filter. Some basic level of filtering is good, but even not so advanced attackers, I think, would get around it.
Yeah, and plus you have a lot of traffic being generated from bots. So bots now are a big part of trying to figure out how to filter out that bad bot traffic from your websites as well. And that's just not traditional web filtering anymore.
Well, Ian, then you start looking at the traffic that is coming out of your internal network and going out, and like, forget it. You know, there's so many things that more and more every day are using HTTP and HTTPS to talk. It's a daunting task.
Yes.
Examining security process maturity. We've got a similar one on stages of automation maturity. This one's talking about process maturity, which I really liked as a term, because it's kind of a cliche thing. We talk about security as a process, but how mature are your processes? I think even a better thing, maybe a segment we do in a future show, is how to create, manage, update your processes that aren't just security specific, but are business specific, that can also help reduce some of your risk in a security context.
we're doing a subset of this in the 5 stages of automation maturity survey, which we're going to do a webcast on in November. It'll be interesting to compare the results. Our survey will come down on Thursday, after Thursday. So on Friday, I'll take it down. We're going to analyze the results because I think it's November 14th. We're doing the results. It'll be interesting to compare pieces of this. We didn't cover, I don't think, the extent of what's in here. And they broke down both industry maturity and then the different process maturities. I think we'll be able to do the same thing because I believe we're capturing some of that data in the survey as well. But it was interesting. E-commerce ranks highest overall when it comes to their overall maturity level, where hosting providers scored the lowest. So they had a subset that they were going after in their survey and kind of ranked the overall maturity. Then they broke down by control area, and this is where we'll have some data overlap here. Data protection actually scored the highest, followed by application software security, training, boundary defense, user management, asset management, and security testing and monitoring at the end. So again, a little broader than what we did, but it'll be interesting to see how some of those maturity levels compare. I was actually a little surprised how high data and app and some of those were, and user management on the list, because those are some of the areas where I still see some weakness overall. But this survey found them to be pretty mature.
It's interesting to see how the trends have changed where we are today. I mean, sitting here doing the show from episode 1, just how much has drastically changed in the past couple of years, right? And I think that, back in the day, you had security incidents, and your defensive technologies were a response to that, right? So you implemented firewalls, you implemented some kind of antivirus. Much of your infrastructure was on premise, so you had vulnerability scanning. I got thinking of it in this context of our conversation coming up later in the show, and like the way things have changed that force you, to tie it back to this article, to change your security processes. And how many folks, like you said, Matt, really largely haven't done that in a lot of cases.
Yeah, exactly right.
And I think that was Kevin's point this week on, was it Business Security Week?
Yeah, Business Security Weekly, yeah. We keep using the same old stuff over and over and over again, not realizing that those technologies are not as effective, which is why we still run into the same issues. And it's time to look at some different solutions, some innovative approaches to try to solve the actual problem. We've seen this in Kevin's case, it was email security and phishing. We've seen this on the endpoint with antivirus, and we'll see others as we continue to move through this transformation phase of technology.
BlackBerry has announced the availability of Cylance Protect for mobile devices.
Well, considering they bought a security company and they're a mobile company,
no surprises.
You knew this was eventually going to happen, right?
But it's not just BlackBerry's mobile devices, I'm sure. Why would you do that? Do they even? Do people still? Can you even get it? Anyway.
Do you even buy a BlackBerry anymore? I don't even know. At one time, they were at like 4% of market share or something like that. So my guess is just doing this for their own phones wouldn't give them much of a benefit. They'd have to go after the Android and the iOS devices as well.
Absolutely. No, I think this is more and more of an emerging area.
Yeah, we
see this week where there's huge issues with malware being discovered in apps in the Google Play Store, and not even in the iOS, in the Apple App Store. We had an article, it was like 19 apps that someone discovered, and it was mostly like ad tracking and such, but still slipping past the filters from each company respectively.
Yeah, and as we continue to do more and more from our phones, we're going to see the mobile devices as an increasing attack vector. Why not? It makes perfect sense. It's something that everybody has with them, and they're accessing all kinds of critical data through those devices, through these mobile apps. So there has to be more emphasis. We did a good segment, I think, a few weeks back on mobile app testing. And the basic question was, how many of your transactions are coming from mobile devices versus your website? And I think most people will be shocked to realize that that trend is moving to the mobile, and those transactions are happening from mobile, but you're not doing the same level of testing on those mobile apps as you are maybe on your web application. And so this is where that attack vector is going to continue to move. So having more solutions available to mobile only makes sense.
Snow Software unveils Risk Monitor to combat security and compliance threats. Not heard of Snow Software.
Nope, nor have I. And I didn't get a chance to do a deep dive beforehand to really understand. It looks like CIS and ISO compliance standards and stuff, but I really have no idea what the heck they're doing.
Yeah, I hadn't heard of them either. It looks like they're sort of a GRC play. I mean, they talk a lot about auditing and automating vulnerability identification, asset discovery, and things like that. A starting point. And it's interesting, in prep for this, I was looking at the exactly what they say, the NIST cybersecurity framework and the CIS, what do they call that now?
The benchmarks.
Benchmarks. They also have the frame. Hold on.
They have the CIS top 20.
CIS top 20.
Yeah,
Thank
the
you.
old SANS top 20 is the CIS top 20.
It's interesting to look at both of those, and I was using it as kind of a guide to develop further topic segments for the show, is to, where those two overlap, where there's gaps between them, and how they address issues like patching. Because in the NIST cybersecurity framework, I couldn't find an instance of patching.
Yeah, that's a good point. No, it should be under the protect domain.
Right? It's under something in there, but they don't specifically call it patching and such, right? And there is something that does address that. But, of course, the CIS controls really call that out. So it'd be interesting to look at those areas, how they overlap with some of our categories, do some segments on that in terms of evaluation, but also the importance and how those fit into your overall security program, into your processes, and looking at the guidance from both of those. And looking at the latest versions of them, I'm like, these are actually pretty good guides, right? I wouldn't call them necessarily like hard and fast compliance standard. It's a guide. You have to look at that and really apply it to your own organization. I think there's an art form to that, not necessarily a science.
Yeah, we actually interviewed Dr. Ron Ross from NIST yesterday on Security and Compliance Weekly episode 4, which will be released soon.
Oh, yeah, I heard that in the background when I was working.
Yeah, and we got into the differences between the standards, what's known as FIPS, the FIPS standards, 199 and 200, the special publications, NIST 853 is a special publication, and then the difference between those two and what is the NIST cybersecurity framework. And he did a really good job breaking it down, because I think a lot of people get confused.
Sure.
The cybersecurity framework was created as an outward-facing document for the private sector to use as a guide, is kind of a framework to approach it, and it takes elements from 853, but not to the same depth. And so anybody who wants to understand kind of how the NIST cybersecurity framework ties into 853, it's a really good discussion with him on a lot of the work that NIST has done, a lot of great control standards that are out there. They're actually moving beyond just the security controls and actually integrating in privacy controls into the different frameworks, which I thought was interesting. So that was a really good segment yesterday that will air hopefully
and then you could overlay the MITRE ATT&CK framework with those three. Someone should do that. I don't know. It's still organization specific, though, I think.
It is, yeah. And that's the other big thing we talked about, is it all starts from the risk management framework.
Yeah.
Every organization's going to identify risks differently and apply different controls out of the different publications to address their risks. And so he talks about starting with the risk management framework, identifying critical data, critical systems, and then applying the appropriate controls out of NIST 853 to really drive your overall program. And again, that's kind of why it varies by organization, is because it's all risk-based for the organization, or should be.
Aviatrix? Aviatrix. Did I say that right? Aviatrix, California-based provider of cloud networking and security services for enterprises, announced a $40 million Series C raise. Are they? Sounds like they have some services bundled in there.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. Sure. Yeah, so they're 76 million in. So I went to their website. This one I did do a little digging on, because I was like, all right, I haven't heard of these guys either.
Sure.
And it looks like a good old networking company that's tried to apply itself to multi-cloud enterprises. And the question I have here is, how relevant is this kind of technology as we move forward in software-defined networks? as we move things into cloud and we're abstracting away the network, how do these solutions actually provide value to an organization moving forward? Now, if you're still heavy on-prem and you're doing some cloud stuff, maybe you need something like this. I could still maybe debate you do or you don't. But if I'm driving a lot of my stuff to the cloud and abstracting away a lot of those networking layers, I'm not sure where these guys have a long-term play. I couldn't tell from their website. It just looks like, some additional networking capabilities on top of your standard network, and I'm like, okay.
Interesting. The big acquisition news this week is Fortinet has acquired enSilo.
So the endpoint consolidation continues. Yeah, absolutely. We all knew this day was coming. We just didn't know exactly when.
Yep.
Right.
And
because
I like enSilo's technology a lot. I've done a couple of different briefings with them and saw some demos, and I was really impressed with the way it managed security on the endpoint. I thought they had a unique, a unique approach. I'll say unique approach. I'm sure there was others that had similar, maybe the same approaches, but enSilo had a great execution of that vision. And basically in the name says, right, like siloing off those processes and noticing when they try and step out of their bounds. It's actually a really effective solution, I thought, to catch a lot of those threats on the endpoint.
Yeah, so now what we're seeing is this continuation of Carbon Black, CrowdStrike go public.
Mm-hmm.
Carbon Black gets bought, Endgame gets bought, enSilo gets bought, Cylance gets bought.
Yep.
I mean, what we're seeing is the consolidation in the endpoint. And what I think this means for others in the space is, where's your exit path? Because you're starting to see some of these large organizations snap up these really good endpoint solutions and integrate them into their portfolio to provide a broader set of capabilities. That's going to stop someday where there's nowhere left to go. And if you're a Tanium or a Cyber Reason or some of these other guys that have raised a lot of money, and they have $100+ million in both cases, right?
That'd be interesting to see who hasn't,
where do you go?
Who hasn't been acquired or gone public that's raised over $100 million. That's a great question in the endpoint space. Yeah. That's a great question. Matt and I will probably do that research and report back just out of sheer curiosity for ourselves, right?
Right. But you are going to, I think, continue to see this consolidation in the endpoint space moving forward. Well, we know there was 85 plus funded. We'll have to figure out how many over 100 million. Who's left as a target, and what's the exit path? Because
I think one factor, Matt, and this is a totally crazy theory, but one factor that I think has dragged out this process, one of the reasons why we probably haven't seen it sooner, the larger companies acquiring endpoint security providers, is Cisco did a really bad job of that 15 plus years ago. A really bad job, right? They acquired a lot of these endpoint and even NAC technologies, right, that had endpoint agents, and the execution was just poor. I saw it as free line items on a lot of deals that Cisco was doing. And the response, my own experience and others' experience with those products, and I'm talking 15 plus years ago, right, was really poor. They didn't integrate well, and they didn't really work all that well. Now, I believe since then, the reports that I have gotten a lot more recently in the past 3 years, is that they are a lot better today. So taking some time to improve that, which is maybe why now the market is ready for, well, my networking firewall provider or whatever also has this endpoint capability. My Elastic Cloud that is, maybe my SIM today also has some endpoint capabilities, is much more palatable to the market today.
Yeah, and as you look at, if you're an organization, you're running 50, 75 different tools, and you can start to get a little consolidation yourself, because now your firewall vendor has endpoint, or your SIM has endpoint, or whatever. You start to consolidate some of that, and you put the burden of the integration actually on the vendor, not on the company itself.
I was just going to say
because it's hard to integrate all this stuff together.
Yeah, it's increasingly complex to integrate. If you ever coded to an API and tried to integrate stuff together, it's very intricate, and it's very, very picky too, right? Like it's very tedious task. And things change between two different vendors. So when we did the interview with Elastic formerly Endgame, right? That's one company today. And they said their development teams are working very closely together. Now you've got one team, right? Large team of very skilled researchers and developers that are working on those integrations for you, and hope that they come up with the right features that actually work and solve your problems so that you can then use them. It saves you the burden of having to tie some of these other things together, because I think there is a lot of great integration between obviously the endpoints and these other security technologies. It makes sense, right?
Yeah. Yep. This is going to continue. The question will be who's left without a suitor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, that was the enterprise security news for this week. Stay tuned for interview coming up with Carter Manussi.